Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 31st Global Public Seminar in Comparative and International Education. I am Maya Chang-Serliani. I am Associate Professor of Comparative and International Education at Oxford. These seminars are jointly organized by the Department of Education and St. Edmund Hall at the University of Oxford. Before I introduce our speaker, let me attend very briefly to a few administrative points. This webinar is being recorded, as you might have noticed, and it will be posted online on our designated page in due course. On that page, you can access all previous webinars as well. When we start the talk, I will post a link to that page in the chat. Please keep yourself muted throughout the webinar unless you have been invited to speak. When you are invited to speak, you can share your comments or ask your questions. During the webinar, feel free to drop a line with your question or comment. Just indicate you want to speak in the chat function so that when the presentation ends, I invite you to introduce yourself and to share your comment or ask your question. Let me introduce our today's speaker. It is Dr. Natthapoj Vincent Trakulphadetkrai. Vincent is Associate Professor of Mathematics Education at the University of Reading in the UK. Vincent has a doctorate from the University of Cambridge, where we first met, and he's also a graduate of MSc in Comparative International Education here at Oxford. He is the founder of a non-profit research-based initiative called mathsthroughstories.org, which sets out to support teachers and parents globally to enrich their children's mathematics learning through using mathematical storytelling. Since October 2023, Vincent has been the ESRC-funded UKRI Policy Fellow, supporting the Education Endowment Foundation to conduct research to identify tangible strategies to increase the research recruitment and its retention success levels. Previously, he has served as the co-convener of the British Educational Research Association's Mathematics Education Special Interest Group. So today we have Vincent to give us a talk on the following topic: an international survey study exploring teachers' perceptions on using mathematical storytelling. He will be focusing on the case of England. The floor is yours, Vincent.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to share my screen. Can you see my screen now? Fantastic. All right, everyone. Well, good afternoon, and I'm very excited to share with you one of my research passions, which is about mathematical storytelling, which in my view is a very effective, low cost, and enjoyable way to teach and learn mathematics. What I hope to do is that I really want to share with you the finding, as Mia said, from just a part of a bigger project. And because the time limitation, it wouldn't be possible for me to talk about every country's findings. So I want to focus on just the finding from England. But given the focus of the seminars, which is about comparative and international education, I will try my best to where appropriate, make some quick comparison with key findings from other countries as well. First thing first, I want to make sure that all of us are on the same page in terms of the construct that we are focusing here. So as you can imagine, mathematical storytelling is not a common term. Obviously, people have heard of storytelling, but I imagine that not everyone would have come across the term of mathematical storytelling. So to help us with that conceptualization of that construct, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you some two very quick examples of mathematical stories, just to give you a sense of what are we actually talking about here. So the first quick example is a story picture book called A Mousy Mess. And this is a story about a young mouse there named Albert, who the moment he saw the human family who lived in the house leaving home to go on a day trip, he came out and along with his friends to play with the human child's toys in that room. But being clumsy as he is, Albert accidentally knocked over the toys, the containers of toys. So what is the problem now? The problem now is that all the toys are now mixed together on the floor. And of course, Albert wanted to fix that because he wouldn't want the human family to come back home and see everything on the floor because they know that something was up, something's not right. So what's the solution then? So Albert, along with his mouse friends, are thinking about how we can put the different toys into the different containers. So for example, Albert's thinking about maybe he can group them by size. Maybe he can group those toys by color. Maybe he can group toys by shape, for example. And nothing really worked until one of his friends said, why don't we group those toys by the toy type? So as you can see on the right page illustration there, they decide to do just that, and they now put in all the marbles into one container, and so on and so forth. So in that very short, very light-hearted story, you will see that if you actually, if you actually look closely, you will see that there's a lot of mathematical learning opportunities there, because you'll get a meaningful everyday situation whereby the characters get to engage in mathematical thinking and try and thinking about classification, for example. The second quick example is called Bigger, Better, and Best. So this is a story about the three young siblings who you can see there, and their parents just take them to their brand new home. And the moment they arrive at that brand new home, the three siblings just run to occupy their own bedroom. And once they've done that, then each of them just shouting, my room has the largest window, my room has the largest floor area. And of course, what's the problem? The problem is everyone making the exact same outrageous claim that they have the largest of everything. So what's the solution then? The solution is to try to find a way to measure, the size of the windows, the size of the floor area. So they came up with this really creative idea of using an informal unit of measurement. So in this case, as hopefully you can see, they use pieces of A4 paper to fully cover the things, the surface areas that they want to measure. So that window is, what is it? 12 pieces of paper large. And then they do the same thing with larger surface area as well. So in this case, as you can see on the next page, they try to use bigger stuff. So in this case, pages of newspaper to try to measure a larger surface area. In this case, the floor area. So again, this is a very quick, short, light-hearted story that, again, if you look at it closely, you'll see that there are plenty of mathematic learning opportunities there in terms of, introducing children to a real world math problems, but also encourage them to think about, solution that they can use to solve that problem as well. I think it's very important for me to mention that when we're thinking about mathematical stories, we shouldn't be thinking about some things that only young children can use and no one else. The examples that I have here for you is a lovely mathematical story series called The Circumference, which is an American stories series where they have, I think, about 12 titles in that now. And the majority of them focus on mathematical concept for the upper end of the primary and secondary school students. For example, pi, radius, diameter, for example. And of course, if you have been studying statistics at some point in your academic journey, you would probably come across Andy Field, Professor Andy Field, and you'll probably recognize, one of his classic textbook, discovering SPSS, discovering statistics with SPSS, for example. But you may also be interested to know that he also wrote another book about 6 years ago that, again, teach very advanced statistical concepts through science fiction. So I hope you'll see that the idea of mathematical storytelling, or in the case of Andy Field, statistical storytelling, are not limited to just 4 or 5 years old students. They are for everyone. So I would say, based on those very quick examples, I would define mathematical storytelling as being the use of narrative that illustrate how mathematical knowledge and skills can be meaningfully used by character in the stories to help them solve a problem. And this approach, as I mentioned before, I would argue can be used with mathematics learners of all ages. Now, why? Why should we encourage teachers around the world to use mathematical storytelling, particularly in the picture book format? Well, because in the picture book format, what do we have? We have page illustration, and that work really well for effective mathematics learning and teaching, because what we need is the visualization of what is otherwise abstract mathematical concept. So the examples that you can see here are, page illustration from 3 different books that show 3 different mathematical concepts: fractions, halving, pi, radius, diameter, for example. And research has shown that through the use of this page illustration in mathematical story picture book, it can really help prompt children's mathematical thinking. Another reason why we should, teachers around the world should be using mathematical storytelling is because it gives meaningful context for mathematics learning. That example there is just a silly example, just to make the point. So the word problem there said, Bob has 36 candy bars. He eats 29. What does he have now? And somebody wrote diabetes. Bob has diabetes, because why would anyone eat 29 candy bars, for example? Mathematically speaking, is there anything wrong with that word problem at all? No, I think you got given just enough bits of information to allow you to solve that problem. But when you stand back and take a look at that word problem, does it actually make sense? Is it authentic problem? Is it a meaningful problem? The answer is probably no. And I would argue that the use of well-written mathematical stories can really help students see meaningful context for the math concept that they are learning. And both of them together, I would argue that it can help foster children's conceptual understanding of mathematical concept, which is really important. So conceptual understanding from the perspectives of Kilpatrick and his colleagues essentially is defined as your ability to represent mathematical situations in different ways using different representations. So let me repeat that one more time for you. So according to Kilpatrick and colleagues, they would define conceptual understanding as your ability to represent mathematical situations in different ways using different representation. If that doesn't mean anything to you, doesn't make any sense to you, do not worry. I have one quick example to share. So this came from another one of my research projects, and to cut a very long story short, I gave year 4 children, so year 4, we're probably talking about 8 to 9 years old, this kind of task whereby they got given a number sentence at the top of the page. Here is 4 times 7 equal blank, and then they got some space to work out the answer. And then you will see that there is a box in the middle on that page where they are asked to visualize the given number sentence by drawing an image or diagram. And then the box at the bottom there is for them to contextualize the given number sentence by posing a corresponding word problem. So let's look at this quick example. 4 times 7 equal blank. This example comes from a year 4 girl, and almost instantly, she was able to use the traditional method to say that 4 times 7 equals 28. And to be fair to her, she was also able to, visualize that number sentence by drawing a 4x7 array of circles. And then when you move down the page, then things get interesting, because here you will see that according to that child, the word problem that in her mind correspond with 4 times 7 is this. A girl goes to the park. She finds this coins, 10p, 5p, 5p. She goes to the ice cream van. She wants one. One ice cream costs 20p. Does she have 20p? Yes. Now, on its own, that word problem makes sense. But to what extent that word problem is supposed to represent, to match 4 times 7 is up for debate. So according to Kilpatrick, he would describe that child as being an excellent human calculator who can perform the procedural arithmetic procedure to give you one correct arithmetic answer after another. But to what extent she actually conceptually understand what 4 times 7 mean, what multiplication mean, is up for debate, because as you can see there from the evidence, she's not able to contextualize the given number sentence. And the reason why I'm saying all this is to really highlight to you the potential of using storytelling, particularly in the picture book format, to help them develop that conceptual understanding in mathematics, which, as I said, really, really important feature of effective mathematics teaching. Now, in terms of the research gap, what I put there is that, while research over the past 3 decades, particularly in the US, have documented pedagogical benefits of teaching mathematics using storytelling, research into teachers' perceptions regarding the use of such approach is virtually non-existent, or was virtually non-existent until our project came along. And this is really bizarre because when you look at pioneers in the research field of teachers' belief, like Thompson back in the 80s, who said, any attempt to improve the quality of teaching, doesn't have to be math teaching, any subject, teaching any subject, must begin with an understanding of the conceptions, the perceptions, the belief held by those teachers. And this resonates well with Harris, who back in the 90s, again, another pioneer in this particular field, talks about the belief teachers hold influence their perceptions and judgment, which in turn affect their behavior in the classroom. So simply put, if we want to change teacher practice, we need to start by exploring the conceptions, the perceptions, the belief they have about teaching. And that provides justification for this study. So just to summarize then, so the focus of this current study, we very much want to answer that question, that research question there. What do teachers, but we want to be inclusive, and we want to include both in-service and pre-service teachers. What do in-service teachers and pre-service teachers in England perceive to be key barriers to and enablers for the use of storytelling in mathematics teaching and learning? And because we want to narrow our focus, we're going to focus on preschool and primary. Even though, as I said, we know that this approach could work really well with secondary school teachers as well. As I mentioned before, in relation to the overall project that I have been leading, we have already published findings from different countries. For example, findings from Ireland, from Australia, from Taiwan, from Malta. And then yeah, so I just want to very briefly acknowledge and thanks those colleagues across the different teams who's been helping me on this big project. In relation to the underpinning theory, we used the Essence TPB, theory of planned behavior, which and if you haven't come across that already, is essentially the idea that a person's behavior, not specific to teacher, just any one of us behavior, is informed by three, or should say influenced by 3 components. The first is attitudes toward the behavior, the second is subjective norm, and the third is perceived behavioral control. So very briefly put, attitude toward the behavior is your personal evaluation of the behavior in question. So in the context of the study is the use of mathematical storytelling. Yeah, so your personal assessment, your personal evaluation of the behavior in question, and this can be either positive or negative. The second component of that theory is what he referred to as subjective norm. I think it's quite clear what it is. It's essentially when a person's beliefs are influenced by perceived social pressures to either perform or not to perform a particular behavior. And then the third and final component is perceived behavioral control, which is when a person's beliefs are influenced by practical factors such as time, money, assistance from other people that either assist or hinder the implementation of that particular behavior. So we will return to this framework in a few slide times as a way to help frame the finding. But I thought I'll just kind of flag this up to you now. Okay, let's talk about research design. So nothing fancy, just your box standard cross-sectional survey design. And in terms of the instrument, we use a survey that I developed in collaboration with colleagues that I mentioned a moment ago. And the unique thing about this survey is that is full of open-ended survey questions, which were very brave of us, because normally you want to keep it as close-ended, so then people don't spend ages on completing that questionnaire. but we thought we will be brave and include predominantly open-ended questions. We have many sections, many questions, but again, in the context of this presentation, I'm going to report to you findings pertaining to two open-ended survey questions, and I will share with you in just one moment on what those two survey questions are. Samples, again, as I mentioned, two groups of survey respondents. We have in-service teachers, meaning teachers who actually, in school already teaching, ISTs. We managed to get responses from around 127 of them across England. And we also obviously invited pre-service teachers or teacher trainees to, again, across England to complete the survey as well. And we have more luck with them. We managed to get over 1,000 responses from them. And the reasons why we have quite a success with collecting survey responses for teacher trainee is because what I did at the time was that I would often be invited to deliver teacher training on Matthew stories to colleagues at different universities across the country and internationally. And then every time when I go and do that, I would ask for permission from my colleagues at that institutions if I could ask their trainees to help complete the research survey at the beginning of my training. And as a result, that's why I think we have quite success in getting those responses. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this in the interest of time, but just to very quickly mention that when it comes to data analysis, there are involve two stages of analysis. The first is thematic, deductive, and inductive analysis. What I meant by that is because we have already developed a coding framework from the different country projects, so we use that as a starting point in a sense that, that is a top-down, we use predetermined themes, so that's deductive, but we also allow for new themes, new categories to emerge from the data set specific to England as well, and that is inductive analysis. Once we have done that, then we move on to stage 2, which is thematic deductive analysis using the TPB framework that I mentioned to you a moment ago. And this will become apparent to you in just one moment, what I mean by stage 2. I won't have time to go through the full step there to show what I did to maximize the coding reliability. When Maya sent the slide to you, you can read that in your own time, but just to say that, I put a lot of thought into the steps that we could take to try to ensure that the coding is as reliable as it could be. Okay, so let's move on to talking about the finding. Let's start with the characteristics of survey participants. First, apologies for the very small text. I'm not expecting you to read anything at all, but if you could focus on the column in the middle first, the green column, that is essentially characteristics of the in-service teachers. So I have shared with you the breakdown in terms of sex, in terms of teaching experience, in terms of class taught, in terms of regions, in terms of training, and training on the use of mathematical storytelling. And then the last bit there at the bottom of the page in terms of the frequency in which they use mathematical stories as part of their mathematics teaching. And then if you look over to the right-hand side, you will see the blue column, and that is essentially the same information, but for pre-service teachers. And then you can now go back to the first column, which is the yellow one, and that is the total kind of a picture across both groups. Two things that I really want to draw your attention to is the figures to do with the training. So let's look at comparison of the proportion of teachers who say that they received the training on mathematical storytelling across the different countries. And when we combine the number of teachers across the different countries, it comes just under 2,000 survey respondents. So again, we have at the first column, sorry, it shouldn't be theme. It should be, answers. Yes, no, cannot remember too long ago. The second column is the average. And the third one is England, specific to this presentation. And then the other columns to the right are, a key finding from the other countries. So if you look at England, over 90% of the teachers in England say that they have never received training on mathematical storytelling. And that is very interesting because when you look at the same answer to the same question in the other countries in the project, England, the percentage of teachers who say no is highest in England. And that's already, even though this is not, an answer to the research question, this is just contextual information, but already it says something quite different when we're looking at that comparatively. The next bit of contextual information is about frequency, how frequent you use mathematical stories as part of your mathematics teaching. And again, we have the same structure. We have average, we have England, and then the additional countries, as it were. So if I can draw your attention to England column first, you will see that over 80% of teachers in England said they never use mathematical storytelling as part of their mathematics teaching, which is really concerning given how we have seen in the past, 20 minutes of the many pedagogical benefits that you can get out of teaching mathematics using storytelling, using story picture book, for example. 80% of teachers, in-service teachers, pre-service teachers in this country said that they never used that before. And then you have another 18%, which is a sizable chunk, who said they did give it a try in the past, but they did so very infrequently. So by infrequently, we mean 1 to 10 lessons. And when I look at the data set last night, it's very much about, oh yes, I did use it for 1 lesson this academic year, or I did use it for 2 lessons this academic year. So if you combine those two figures together, the never and the infrequently figures, then we're talking about 98% of teachers in this study in this country who said they never used it before, or they use it but very infrequently. And then when you look at the figures, compare with, say, teachers in Australia, compared to teachers in Ireland and Malta, for example, you start to see that there's something not quite right there. And for some reason, teachers in England just are less aware of the approach, or maybe they are aware, but for some reason they haven't been able to actually implement that behavior, that particular teaching strategy. All right, let's move on to talking about the actual finding, to the actual research questions. So we're going to start with enablers first. And as I said to you, here is the wording of that survey question, that open-ended survey question. What would enable you to integrate storytelling as part of your mathematics teaching? So through that inductive/inductive analysis process, it reveals, it shows that there are 13 categories that can be broadly grouped under 6 themes. Many of them are very similar categories and themes that we have found elsewhere in other countries, but we also have come across 1 or 2 new categories as well, which I'll share with you in just one moment. I'm not going to go into any detail, given that we're very, time is tight, but I'm just going to wave at you virtually the different headlines, the different finding. So let's look at theme 1. This is very much about availability of resources, and this represents the largest theme, the largest enabler in this data set. This theme has 2 categories. For example, the first category said teachers would feel encouraged and inspired to teach, to adopt mathematical storytelling if they have availability of relevant story picture books for their mathematics teaching, and also a database of such books as well. The second category is they would be encouraged and inspired by the availability of story-based math lesson ideas. And again, those 2 categories represent a sizable chunk of what teachers said in the data set. Swiftly moving on to theme 2, and apologies, I appreciate it's very small, so I'm not expecting you to read anything, but just to say that theme 2 is very much about perceived pedagogical benefits. And there are, I believe, 7 categories altogether. So for example, the first one said teacher would be encouraged and inspired by their own perception that the approach can make their teaching more engaging and fun. The next one, teachers would be encouraged and inspired by their own perceptions that the approach can help children apply and make meaningful connection between their mathematics learning at school and their everyday life. Now you will see that there is 1 category right at the bottom of that list in red, and that is the new theme that emerged as part of that inductive analysis. And that new theme is, it says, encouraged and inspired by teachers' own perception that the approach can help make mathematics learning more memorable. So again, that is an interesting kind of new theme that emerged, although it doesn't represent a massive amount of the codes that we see, but it is still there. Theme 3 is about knowledge of the approach. And again, I'm not going to go through everything, just give you one example. Category 10, encourage and inspired by teacher training program and all other forms of professional development training. Theme 4, desire to improve teaching. An example category for that theme is teachers say that they would be encouraged and inspired by their own belief in the value of cross-curricular teaching. Category 14, teachers said they would be encouraged and inspired by their own desire to try a new method of teaching mathematics. Theme 5, enabling social norms. This is an interesting one. That's just one category. Category 16, and it said teacher would be encouraged and inspired by school ethos and key stakeholders. For example, head teachers, their teacher mentors, colleagues, and parents. And then the sixth and final theme is love of stories. Again, I'm just going to focus on just one example category. Category 17, it said teacher would they encourage and inspired by their own love of stories. It doesn't have to be math stories, but they just love stories in general. And so as a result of that, they're then even more likely to use mathematical storytelling as part of their mathematics teaching. And again, as I said, I would try to make connection, link it back to the TPB framework. So I would argue that in relation to that first component, the themes that talk about perceived pedagogical benefits, desire to improve teaching, and love of stories can come under that first component quite nicely. The second component there, subject norm, we also have a theme, didn't we, that say enabling social norm, and that seemed to fit into that component quite nicely. And then the third component there of the TPB framework is perceived behavioral control. And I would argue that two of our themes, two of our enablers, availability of resources and knowledge of the approach could also fit, could come under that component quite nicely as well. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, again, because of the time limitation. But if we go down the first column, you will see the 6 themes. If you then look at the England column, you will see me repeating the percentage figure, the headline finding. And then you'll see that, interestingly, when you look at theme 1, availability of resources, that for some reason seemed to be one of the top things that appear in teachers' mind in this country about how they would use that approach if the resources are there. And for me, theme 3, knowledge of the approach, is also interesting as well. When you look at the result from the other countries, for some reason we are dramatically higher than the other countries in the overall project. And I'm still not entirely sure why. I probably need a bit more time to do a bit more thinking, but it's just an interesting patterns there already. Very swiftly, in the last sort of 7 minutes that we have left, we're going to now focus to barriers. So again, in terms of the wording of the survey question, what would prevent you from integrating storytelling as part of your mathematics teaching? Very similar in terms of the number of categories and themes. So here we have around 17 categories that can be broadly grouped under 5 themes. Again, I'm not going to go through all of them, just to read you one example from each slide. The first theme here in relation to barriers is about lack of pedagogical knowledge and confidence. This represents over half of all the codes in the data set, so 52.3%. An example category is that category 1, where it said limited or lack of awareness of suitable story picture books for a specific mathematical concept or age group. Theme 2, again, apologies for the small size. Theme 2 is about doubt about outcome expectancy, and again, not as high as the previous theme, but still a sizable chunk, 25.3, just over a quarter of all the codes and data is about theme 2. And one category example is category 5, perceived unsuitability of the approach for children of certain age groups. Because some teacher would say, oh, this is for babies, I'm teaching year 6, this is not appropriate for them, they're too old for this. But as we have seen, in the first 5 minutes of this presentation, that there are resources across 4 age group. Theme 3, time constraint, another chunky one, 11%. And this when teachers talk about how they have limited or lack of time to do various things, to find suitable mathematical story picture book to plan the lesson using that approach. Theme 4, resource constraint. For example, category 16 is said limited or lack of suitable story picture books for mathematics teaching at school. And then the fifth and final theme, inhibiting social norm, just 2%, but it's still there. Category 17 said perceived unwillingness of key stakeholders, for example, head teachers, teacher mentors, parents, for this approach to be trial in their class. And again, linking it back to the TPB framework, I would argue that doubt about outcome expectancy could fit in nicely to the first component there, inhibiting social norm, the second component, and then the lack of pedagogical knowledge and confidence, time constraint, resource constraint can fit under the perceived behavioral control. Again, we won't go into any detail at all, except just to say, wave at you virtually, the key comparison. So again, if you look at the first column, you will see the 5 different themes going down that first column. And then if you go straight to the England column, you will see the kind of reiteration of the key percentage finding, as it were. I really like the fact that when it comes to theme 2, doubts about outcome expectancy, 25.3, over a quarter of the data set in England is about that. And that is very interesting because when you compare to the same percentage figure in other countries, it's not as high. And the way I like to interpret that percentage is because we are a bit more pessimistic about things in life in this country. That's why when it comes to doubts about outcome expectancy on that approach, there's a lot more thinking happening there. Okay, so just conclusion and limitation. The emerging belief structure as found in our studies data set across the 5+1 countries is quite stable and consistent. So no matter, we use that coding framework for teachers in Australia and Ireland, we pretty much end up with the same belief structure. And the second point, second conclusion that I make there is that Asson's TPB provide a useful framework to help us meaningfully frame our finding. And then the third thing is that the study finding highlight the role of professional learning and teacher training in ensuring that both in-service teachers, but also teacher trainees have the necessarily pedagogical knowledge and experience and confidence in using mathematical storytelling to support their own mathematics teaching. And then just one quick point on limitation, which I'm sure many of you would have already picked up already, and that is how in the context of this England paper, or I should say data set, in-service teachers were significantly outnumbered by pre-service teachers. So the kind of things, the kind of findings that we have seen are arguably skewed towards pre-service teachers. If we have the same number of teachers across both groups, who know the finding may be different. So that is one of the key limitations, I would say. Now, in the last 2 minutes that I have left, I'm kind of keeping my eye on Mia. I just want to talk a little bit about what I have been doing with that finding. So what I have been doing is that I have used that to help design my teacher training workshop. So, over the years, I have now been providing math through story training to over 4,000 in-service and pre-service teachers across the UK and internationally. So they get to, because, we learn, right? One of the key barriers is that lack of knowledge in this approach, that lack of confidence. So, great, let's do something about it. So it's not just you as a researcher, do the research, publish the research and stop, but you still need to take that next step of what do you then do with the findings. So I chose to do this kind of workshop to ensure that teachers have a better knowledge and confidence when it comes to the approach. I've also created a website called maththroughstories.org back in 2017, and it has been now viewed over 1.5 million times by around 430,000 teachers and parents from literally every countries around the world. It gives many free online resources, the world's largest database of recommendation for mathematical stories, book reviews, lesson plan ideas. You remember that's one of the categories, one of the key barriers when teachers said, oh, if only there's lesson plan ideas, that would help me, but otherwise I wouldn't be able to know how to do this approach. So we carefully look at the key finding, and we use that key finding to do something about. We also produce case study videos, and we already seen emerging impact where a lot of schools across the country have recommended our website on their school math, math curriculum webpage or something. And if you have heard of a large education charity here in the UK, the Education Endowment Foundation, it also recommends maththroughstories.org as being one of the go-to resources for teachers and parents in the country, as well as recommended in their guidance report. I will stop here. Maya, over to you.
Thank you so much, Vince. This was a fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it, although it's not my area. But because it's not my area, I learned quite a lot. And, it's quite a gift that you have to present everything so clearly, to make it so accessible for a listener. And it really helped also to have those comparative insights with other countries to see where England stands before you showed your findings. So this was great, and I'm sure this presentation itself will be a great resource for teachers as well as students of education. We do not at the moment, I think, have any questions from the audience, so I could start. When I was listening to you talking with great passion about this topic, and myself, I got so interested in this, in using storytelling for maths. I wanted to ask you, is there a personal story somewhere there? How did you get interested in the storytelling yourself? Because very often, if we look at our research interests, there is always some personal connection or a story. So what is your story, if there is anything behind it, and if you wanted to share with us?
That's a really good opening question there. So would it surprise you to hear that as an associate professor of mathematics education, I did not enjoy learning mathematics myself when I was younger at school, particularly at secondary school, because every time I'm thinking about my own mathematics learning experience in that age period in my life, the kind of image I have in my mind is worksheet and textbook. Even though the teachers themselves are amazing, as human beings, but the approach that was adopted was very much, traditional. Here's, a big, thick textbook on calculus. Off you go, best of luck. And I just really want to do something to change that, because I felt like, we have this really cool way of teaching mathematics, which means that no longer students have to endure and go through the same suffering journey that our generation had gone through. So let's do something that is quite creative, that doesn't seem scary, that is inviting people of different mathematical abilities to learn mathematics, to want to learn mathematical concepts.
This, because if anyone also comes in, it will be better to see them if you wanted to unshare the slides.
Yeah, sure.
Great. Yeah. I encourage everyone to please indicate in the chat if you want to speak. Otherwise, I have so many questions. I could continue forever. So my next question was about your hypothesis. Why is it that English teachers use storytelling less? Is it because they are less aware of this, or there are some other reasons why they are aware, but they do not want to use it? Maybe it's not culturally expected. So I know very little. So if you would tell us a little bit about your own ideas why English teachers use this less, it will be really great.
Sure. So in the context of, again, another really good question. In the context of teaching in England, particularly in what we call local authority maintained school, which is a fancy word for government funded schools. Many schools in this day and age in this country tend to pay to subscribe to companies that produce teaching schemes of work. So in this country, we would probably have, some of you may have come across mathematics teaching scheme of work called, White Rose Math, but there's also a few other popular math teaching scheme as well. And when you take a look at that, it can be a bit scary to see, particularly because part of my role is not just researcher, but also teacher educator as well, where I train, people who want to become teachers to become one. And, sometimes I would go to, observe them teaching in classroom as part of the course. And, I would ask them to tell me about how they plan the lessons. And they would say, my teacher just gave me this PowerPoint from this scheme of work to teach, and all I have to do is to just read out what slide 1 say to the class and what slide 2 say to the class, and the activity ideas have already been thought of. And so it's no longer like teaching back in the day where you really have to rely on your creativity and your critical thinking on what, in your view, is effective teaching. In this day and age, that thinking has already been done for you. And some people may argue that it's great because not every teachers are confident in mathematics teaching. So by having that scheme of work done for them, at least they will ensure a certain level of quality in mathematics instruction. But on the flip side of that, it can be quite limiting. And we've seen that from this data set where a number of teachers, both in-service and pre-service teachers, talk about how, oh, this approach sounds nice, but I can't do it because my schools use this particular math scheme of work and we have to follow that. So I would argue, so in answering your question, I would say is that it is that culture of teaching mathematics in this country that present itself as being a key barrier to teachers who wanting to teach mathematics creatively. They don't feel like they are now able to because they felt like they have to follow every single word on the scheme of work on the pre-made PowerPoint that the school pay a lot of money to. They don't want to deviate from that. And so it would take a lot of work to change that mindset, to kind of nurture a new culture, a new way of thinking about mathematics teaching. But yeah, so I would say that this is particularly prevalent in this country. And I don't think that is teachers in those other countries, those few other countries have the same level of problem that we do here.
I see. So basically, you are saying that there is very less autonomy that
Right.
very little autonomy that teachers have,
Yeah.
and if more storytelling was to happen in mathematics classrooms, this needs to be done kind of top down because of the
Exactly.
system that we have.
Right. Correct.
Oh, I see.
And to be fair to everyone, when you're talking about the problem with autonomy, it's two types of problem with autonomy. Is it could be actual problem with lack of autonomy, whereby there may actually be some school who are very strict and say do not deviate from the scheme of work. But there may be also a perceived lack of autonomy, whereby the head teacher may actually might not actually have an issue with teachers deviating from that lesson ideas or from that scheme of work. But teachers on the ground think that because the school have paid a lot of money to subscribe to this scheme of work, they felt like they now have to they don't have any other choices. They just have to follow that. So it could be actual lack of autonomy, but it could also be perceived lack of autonomy as well.
Thank you, Vince. Banu Nalani has a question. Banu, can I invite you, please? Please introduce yourself and share your question.
Hey, hi. Thank you for the presentation, Vincent. I'm a tech guy, been interested in math for a long time, and I've been one of the similar things, hated math because of all the, too many symbols and too many abstract things. But so I've been following your website for a long time. So my question basically, so you did talk about, and maybe that's not the research focus for this presentation, was like how teachers have enablers and blockers in taking math and, presenting itself as a story. What about students? Like, do you have research-backed studies that show that students have an interest to learn math through storytelling, and it has actually helped them to have firmer grasp on the concepts more than the more traditional way of teaching it?
Oh, I'm very pleased that you asked that question. And to answer that question, I'm gonna see if Maya would give me permission to share my screen again. Give me 2 seconds, everyone. I'm gonna opening a website to help answering that question. Where would that be? Can you see my screen now?
It is visible. Thank you.
Fantastic. So for the past 50 minutes, we've been talking about storytelling in a very traditional sense, whereby it's the teachers who would pick a story, a math stories that they can buy off Amazon or in bookshop and share that with their class. So imagine, a very traditional model of teachers standing in front of the class and read a story to their students, for example. What I have been trying to do over the past 5 years now is to move that both research and practice forward by changing the role of students from being consumers of mathematical stories to being producers of mathematical stories. And what I meant by that is I've been encouraging teachers around the world to encourage their students to create their own short mathematical story picture books. So an example that I can share with you is that one there, where this is, I'm not going to do the full screening thing because it would just mess up the whole thing. So as long as you can see some images on that, I hope that's okay. So this example is from a 10 years old girl. It's called Fraction Friends. You will see on the left-hand side, the page illustration on the left-hand side, there is a character, 25% there, sitting on a bench on the school playground, looking a bit sad. And the reason why he's feeling sad is because everyone else in that school are fractions. They're not like him. So he felt a bit like the odd one out. And then on the right-hand side, page illustration, you'll see that one of the teachers happened to be walking by, and he asks, 25%, what's wrong? Why are you looking a bit sad? And 25% explained, well, I'm sad because, I'm the odd one out. And Mr. Equal, the teachers, then said, you know what? Actually, you're not that different from other people, because if you think about it, 25% is just 25 out of 100. And already, there you go. You are a fraction. So you're just like everyone else. And then Mr. Equal go on to show that, if you want to, you can simplify 25 over 100 to become a quarter as well. And he used words, he used models, he used pictures to help with that explanation process. And then on the right hand side, you'll see that final page of this book that this child created. You'll see that you have a quarter there looking happy because it's no longer 25%, it's now a quarter, and that character now felt like he's able to fit in more with his friends. And the reason why I'm saying all this to you is that obviously I haven't really focused on that as part of this very short talk, but there is a lot of work that I've done over the past 5 years in the background to really encourage students and teachers to think about mathematical storytelling in a new way, not in the passive student listening to stories way, but more about a new, exciting, active way where students get an opportunity to create their own mathematical story picture books. So as a result of that, back in 2019, I launched the world's first mathematical story writing competition called the YMSA, Young Mathematical Story Authors. And since then, I have received almost 4,000 entries from students over 260 schools in 23 countries. And in answering your question, the reason why I want to share the screen is because I want to go to this page, where you can read for yourself what the students who took part in this competition say, particularly the bit in bold. So this is the winner of the younger age category. And she said, I feel that teachers across the world should give their students opportunities to create their own mathematical story picture books as part of their math lessons, so students get to learn math in a more effective, authentic, and engaging way. This is an author of a shortlisted entry, and he said, I think math teachers should give opportunity for their students to write math stories in their classes because they are fun to write as well as to read. They make topic easier to engage with because we are learning math concept while being creative and using our imagination. And then the last example is this one here. So this is a boy from Hong Kong, international school in Hong Kong. And he said, I think math teachers should give students opportunity to create my story picture book in my lesson because it helps us learn math better and can improve our writing skills. This is a massive opportunity that we don't want to miss! Exclamation marks. So, so I hope that in a small way help answer your question about what students think about this approach, about learning mathematics through storytelling. And there's a demand out there, within the student community around the world who really just been waiting for teacher to give them an opportunity to do this learning mathematics in a new way. And yet, as we see from the data set, teachers are not even aware of the old classic model of mathematical storytelling, never mind the new exciting version that I've been pushing, right? Even just the classic version, they still are not even aware that that is a possibility. So there is a lot of work that, you know, I have to do, that other people have to do. I can't do it on my own to really make this at the forefront of mathematics teachers thinking around the world, not just in the UK, not just in England.
So much, Vince. That was an excellent talk and very insightful responses. Thank you for everyone for joining us.
Sorry,
Oh,
I
did
just
you
have
have a follow-up question, Banu?
Yeah, just one more question. Vincent, I did see a contact us button in the website. I would like to talk to you more about this. Do you mind if I send you a message and we could, have a simple meeting? And I'll be in UK. I'm in the US, but I'll be in UK for a bit, and I could meet you in Reading as well. So I have some few ideas I would love to run you through.
Fantastic. I'm just one train stop away from Oxford, so
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. And sorry to cut you off.
No, that's fine.
And so I was just thanking everyone for joining, thanking Vincent for a great talk and insightful responses. We'll be taking a little break over the summer with our seminars, but I hope to put together an exciting new program for autumn and to come back in autumn. I hope to post some information on the new program via social media. Thank you for joining and have a relaxing summer. Hope to see you in autumn. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye-bye.